I was 33 the weekend my mother-in-law threw my son's crib in the trash. My husband was deployed. I was at drill 2 hours outside cell range doing the thing the army pays me to do. When I turned onto our street that Saturday afternoon, the first thing I saw was our gray bin at the curb with 4 white slats sticking up out of it like ribs. Linda was in the doorway with primer on her hands and a smile on her face. Let me back up to the version of me that still thought careful was enough. I joined at 18 because the alternative was a trailer in a town already forgetting my name. 11 years later, I had stripes on my sleeve, a clean record, and a 10-week-old boy named Noah who smelled like milk and laundry soap. Daniel was 3 months into an overseas deployment, so most nights it was just me and Noah and the particular exhaustion of doing everything right while bracing for the day it isn't enough. My own mother had passed 2 years before. The last thing her hands ever made was a knit blanket the color of wheat. I kept it folded over the rail of Noah's crib so a piece of her would always be near him. People who don't live this life think soldiering and single parenthood is about toughness. It isn't, it's about lists. I had one for feedings, one for the sitter, one taped inside the kitchen cabinet for anyone who might need to step in. I trusted paper more than promises because paper doesn't change its story when it becomes inconvenient. That weekend, I had a plan for every hour of drill. I knew who had Noah when he ate, where his pediatrician was, what to do if the power went out. I had thought of everything. I did not have a plan for Linda. Daniel's mother had decided to dislike me before I said a word. At our wedding, she told a cousin I looked sturdy, as if that were the kindest thing she could manage. Whenever Noah came up, she had a line she repeated, soft as a hymn and sharp as a blade. A baby needs roots, not a duffel bag. I used to think it was snobbery. It wasn't, and I won't pretend it was because the truth is sadder. Daniel's father had been Army too, gone more years than he was home, and one day gone for good. Linda raised Daniel alone in a house that smelled like resentment and burnt coffee. When she looked at me, she didn't see her son's wife. She saw the uniform that had taken her husband, walking around with her grandson on its hip. I understood that, but understanding why a person is cruel is not the same as agreeing to be the place they put it. The week before drill, Linda called Daniel's sister Brenda and the two of them decided I needed support. Linda texted me full of warmth and exclamation points. She'd love to come stay a few days and meet the baby properly. I told her the schedule was covered. She told me family always finds a way. I didn't sleep well that night and I couldn't have told you exactly why. Here is something most civilians don't know. If you're a soldier with a child and no spouse on hand, you are required, not suggested, required to have a family care plan on file. It names exactly who cares for your child when duty calls you away, and that person must be vetted and approved in writing. My plan named Dana, the wife of a guy in my unit, a woman I'd trusted through 3 deployments. Dana had a key, my pediatrician's number, and the same list everyone got. Linda was not on that plan. Linda had never been on that plan because a plan is a promise you can't take back when you're angry, and I did not trust her promises. I'd also enrolled us in the new parent support program, a nurse who visits your home to check on the baby and the new mother. Free, voluntary, gentle. My nurse was Miss Calloway, and she had a visit scheduled for that very Saturday. The Friday before drill, Linda texted again, "I'll just pop by to see the baby." My stomach turned. I texted Dana immediately, "Do not leave him with anyone but me." She sent back a thumbs up. I locked my phone, told myself I was being dramatic, and went to pack my ruck. I was being a lot of things that weekend. Dramatic wasn't one of them. Saturday came gray and early. The reserve center was 40 minutes out, past the feed store and the long flat stretch where the radio loses every station but one. We had a field exercise on the schedule, which meant phones locked in a metal cabinet for 2 hours. No exceptions, no signal anyway. Before I left, I stood in the nursery with Noah on my shoulder, swaying without deciding to. The room was small and plain, and his crib against the wall, the wheat-colored blanket folded over the rail, the little lamp that hummed. I pressed my face into the warm spot behind his ear and breathed him in. Milk and that blanket and the particular sweetness of a baby who has no idea the world is anything but safe. Dana arrived at 8 on the dot. I went over the list out loud even though she knew it cold. I kissed his forehead, handed him over, and walked to my truck while my chest did the thing it always did, that tight pull like a seat belt across the heart. I told myself the hard part was leaving. I was wrong about which part of that day was going to be hard. I pieced together what happened next from Dana and from people honest enough to tell me what they saw. Around 10 that morning, a car pulled into my driveway. Linda and Brenda, who lived 20 minutes away and had appointed herself the responsible one in a family that confused control with love. They knocked, and when Dana opened the door with Noah on her hip, Linda walked in like she owned the deed. "We're family," she said. "We've got him now." Dana said no. She said it twice, polite the first time, firm the second, and she pulled out her phone to call me, which is exactly what I'd have wanted. But there was no answer because my phone was in a metal cabinet 40 minutes away. Brenda stepped between Dana and the nursery and said the thing this family always says when it wants to do harm and call it love. Family handles family. Dana stood her ground as long as she could, but she was a guest in someone else's house, outnumbered with no signal and no idea when I'd surface. Linda kept up that pleasant, immovable pressure that certain women have perfected over decades. Eventually, Dana left because the only other option was a screaming match in front of a 10-week-old. She texted me the second she got bars at the end of the street. Her last words to me later were the ones that still sit in my chest. As she backed out, she looked up and through the front window saw Linda already dragging something heavy toward the door. What Linda did next, she did believing she was saving her grandson. That's the part people find hard to hear. She didn't think of herself as a villain, she thought of herself as a rescuer. And that made her dangerous in a way plain meanness never is. She walked into Noah's nursery and decided it offended her. Too bare, too military. She said later the room looked like a barracks. So she opened a can of primer she'd brought in the trunk, of course she'd brought paint, and started rolling gray over my son's walls while he napped one room away. The sharp chemical smell filled the house. A neighbor named Pat, a friend of Linda's from church who liked nothing better than a project with someone else's family at the center, drifted over and started filming on her phone. She narrated in a low, pious voice about poor Daniel and that baby and the mother who was never home. Linda stood in the wet paint and declared to the room and to Pat's camera, "No grandchild of mine sleeps in a supply closet." Then she turned to look at the crib. She moved Noah out of it and laid him on the guest bed instead, a big, soft adult mattress propped between two pillows in a room thick with primer fumes, door shut, a space heater ticking 3 feet from his face. Every single thing about that is what a nurse would call an unsafe sleep environment. Then she and Brenda carried the crib out the front door and shoved it into the gray bin at the curb. The slats were too tall to fit all the way down. They threw the safe sleep gear in after it. They threw the wheat-colored blanket in too, the last thing my mother's hands ever made, balled up and tossed on top like garbage. Pat filmed. Brenda laughed. And Linda, wiping primer off her palms, looked at the wreckage of my son's small world and said the words I would hear repeated back to me by a caseworker before the day was over. "No army brat will ruin my son's house." She was still smiling when the knock came at the door. None of them were expecting anyone, but it was 1:30 on a Saturday and a visit had been on my calendar for 2 weeks. Miss Calloway didn't need to come inside to start adding it up. There was a crib in the trash bin at the curb with the slats poking out. There was the smell of fresh paint rolling through the open door. There was a stranger with primer on her hands telling her there was no soldier here today and she could go. Calloway asked where the baby was. Linda said he was sleeping and it wasn't her concern. Calloway is a mandated reporter. The law doesn't give her the option of pretending she didn't see what she saw. She told Linda evenly that she had an obligation to report the conditions in front of her. Then she walked back to her car and made the call that started everything. At 11:30, they unlocked the cabinet and handed our phones back. Mine lit up the moment it powered on and kept lighting up. Texts from Dana stacked one on top of the other, each worse than the last. They made me leave. "Crystal, I'm so sorry, I tried." Then a photo snapped fast through a windshield, blurry but unmistakable. My trash bin at the curb. 4 white slats reaching up out of it. I've been trained to keep my hands steady when everything in me wants to shake. That training is the only reason I didn't drop the phone. My stomach went through the floor, but my hands stayed flat and still, and some cold, quiet part of my brain started doing what it does best, making a list. Panic is a luxury. I filed it away for later. I walked, did not run, to my first sergeant and held up the phone so he could see the photo. His face did something I'd never seen it do. It went to stone. He looked at the picture, then at me, and he didn't ask a single question I'd have to answer twice. Thorn go, he was already reaching for his own phone. I'll make the calls. I had 40 minutes of road between me and my son. I drove every one of them like the speed limit was a personal insult. Here's the machine I didn't fully understand was already running. When a report of an unsafe child comes in and that child belongs to a military family, the civilian side and the military side don't work in separate rooms. They talk. Child Protective Services contacts the installation's Family Advocacy Program. Family Advocacy notifies the soldier's commander, law enforcement, and the medical side, and they move as a team because a child's safety is not something anyone is allowed to sit on. I knew all of this the way you know the rules of a game you've never had to play. On the long, flat stretch where the radio dies, I called Dana on speaker and made her walk me through it minute by minute. I wasn't venting. I was building a timeline the way I'd build one for an after-action report, because somewhere in the back of my training, my brain had already decided this was going to come down to who could tell the truth in order with dates. Dana kept apologizing. I kept telling her she'd done exactly right because she had. The failure wasn't hers and it wasn't mine. It belonged to a woman who walked into my house and decided love meant getting her own way. I pulled onto our street and there it was, our gray bin at the curb, 4 white slats reaching up out of it. I left the truck half in the driveway and went through my own front door. The smell hit me before anything else, primer thick enough to taste, every window shut tight against the cold. I found my son on the guest bed between 2 pillows near a space heater. I had him up against my chest in under a second. I carried him straight to the living room, threw the windows open one-handed, killed the heater, and stood there in the cold, clean air feeling his breath against my neck while my heart finally caught up with my body. Linda came out of the hallway with primer still on her hands and looked at me like I was the intruder. "Well," she said, finally decided to act like a mother. I did not raise my voice. I have learned that the quietest thing in the room is usually the one people remember. "Step back from him," I said. Now, she stepped back. I think the flatness surprised her more than yelling would have. On my way past the front door, I looked into that trash bin one more time. There in the corner, a fold of wheat-colored wool balled up under the slats. My mother's blanket. That was the moment the cold quiet in me turned into something with a spine. The first thing I did was not yell at Linda. The first thing I did was put Noah in his car seat and drive him to the clinic, because the only opinion in that house I cared about was a doctor's. They checked him head to toe. He was fine, pink, fussy, hungry, perfect. No harm done, which is a sentence I have thanked God for more times than I can count, because it could so easily have gone another way. While they weighed him, I stood in the corner and started writing. Times, names, what Dana saw, what I'd walked into. I saved her photo in 3 places so it couldn't disappear. It wasn't strategy, it was instinct. The same instinct that keeps a soldier's gear squared away when everything else is chaos. By the time we got home, Linda and Brenda had cleaned up the visible mess as if a mopped floor could unring a bell. Brenda texted, "Everyone saw." The kind of message that told me they thought this was a fight about appearances. Pat had posted her video to the neighborhood page. The comments were already stacking up. I read 3 of them and put the phone face down. "Everyone saw," Brenda said. I sat on the floor of my son's stripped, pain-streaking nursery and thought very calmly, "You have no idea what everyone is about to see." That night, after Noah was finally down in a borrowed bassinet a neighbor had dropped off, I sat at the kitchen table with my binder and turned on every light in the house. The family care plan with Dana's vetted name and the approval stamp, Linda's name nowhere on any line. The new parent support enrollment. The pediatrician's current records. The schedule, the list taped inside the cabinet. Years of being told I was too careful, too rigid, that I treated raising a baby like a deployment. That night, every careful thing I'd ever done lined up like sandbags against a flood. I found an email I'd glanced at hours earlier without really reading. Calloway's office had sent me a copy of something at 1:48 that afternoon while I was at the clinic. I opened it on my laptop. It was the report. Not a warning, not a heads up, the actual filed report of what she'd observed at my address with a timestamp, a case number, and language I recognized from my own job. I read it twice. The last paragraph said that because the child belonged to an active duty family, The matter had been referred to the installation's family advocacy program, and that family advocacy would, per standard procedure, notify the service member's commander. The service member's commander, not Daniel's, mine. I read that line 4 times. The machine I'd always pictured as something cold that happened to other people was running right now, on a track that led from my trash bin straight back to a captain who knew my name and had signed my last evaluation. But here is the thing I held onto for the rest of that long night. That machine was not coming to take my son. It was coming because a nurse had done her job and a first sergeant had made his calls. And somewhere in a file was 11 years of me doing the boring, careful, documented things. The system Linda thought she could turn against the army brat was a system I lived inside the right way. I sat there with the laptop glowing and caught myself almost smiling. The dry, tired smile of a person who's been underestimated one too many times. No army brat will ruin my son's house. I said it out loud to the empty kitchen. And then I said the thing I'd say to her face soon enough. It's not his house. My phone buzzed, Captain Doyle on a Saturday night. Sergeant Thorne, he said, we need to talk about what's coming to your door tomorrow. Doyle didn't waste words. A caseworker from CPS would be coming Monday to do an assessment. That's what happens when a report is filed, no exceptions. Family advocacy was already looped in. He would be there himself in person representing the command. Then he told me the thing I needed to hear and the thing I needed to be warned about in the same breath. Your record speaks for you, he said. Let it speak, don't argue. Don't perform, put the truth and the paperwork on the table and let people read it. After we hung up, I sat in the dark a while. Somewhere across town, Linda was no doubt telling Brenda and Pat that she'd handled it, that the authorities were finally going to see what she'd always seen. She thought she was the one who'd called the system down on me. She had no idea the system was already standing behind me, and that Monday she was going to find out exactly which way it faced. Linda came by Sunday morning uninvited, the way she did everything. She dressed up. She wanted to smooth things over, which in her language meant she wanted me to agree that none of it would go further for the good of the family name. She stood in my half-painted living room and told me a mother understands what's best. And then, for one strange minute, the armor slipped and I saw the actual woman underneath. She talked about the years she'd raised Daniel alone, about walking the floor with a colicky baby while her husband was at some post she couldn't pronounce, about the particular loneliness of loving someone the army owns a piece of. Her voice cracked. For that minute I felt for her genuinely because I knew that loneliness from the inside now. But then she wiped her eyes, set her jaw, and put it all right back on me. I raised my son alone so the army couldn't have him, she said. Now it has you and it's taking my grandson too. That was the moment I stopped feeling sorry for her. Grief is real. But she had decided to turn hers into a weapon and aim it at a 10-week-old's crib. Then she said something that told me just how upside down she had it. I already told the worker everything. They'll see. She thought she was the complainant. She thought when the caseworker arrived, she'd be the responsible grandmother handing over evidence against the bad mother. I didn't correct her. There are some lessons a person has to walk all the way into. I'm sure they'll see everything, I said and showed her the door. Monday morning, I want to be honest about it because pretending I wasn't scared would be its own kind of lie. I knew the stakes. An assessment can clear you, but it can also open a longer investigation. And a longer investigation touches everything: custody, career, security clearance, your name on a base where everybody talks. If my paperwork had been sloppy, if the facts had been murky, I'd have spent months proving I wasn't what a video said I was. So I did the only thing I know how to do under pressure. I prepared. I went through the binder one final time, tab by tab, the way I'd check a weapon before I trusted my life to it. Dana came early in her good blouse, nervous and fierce and ready. I went room to room and opened every window I could reach, pushing the last of the primer smell out the back of the house. I just couldn't stand the thought of them walking in and smelling what she'd done. At 10 on the dot, a plain sedan turned onto my block and slowed in front of the house. Behind it, a second car, government plates. My pulse went up and my hands stayed flat and still. The doorbell rang. The caseworker introduced herself as Miss Ruiz, calm, neutral, unreadable. A woman whose whole job is to not take anybody's word for anything. She had a folder of her own. Before I could say a word, Linda swept in from the porch where she'd been waiting, launched into her version like she'd been rehearsing it all weekend, which she had. The absent mother who ran off to play soldier. The state of the house, conveniently omitting who'd made it that way. The half-painted walls gestured to as evidence of my neglect. Brenda stood at her shoulder nodding, and out on the lawn, Pat had her phone up again. I stood there holding Noah and said almost nothing, which nearly killed me. Every instinct screamed to defend myself, to match Linda word for word. But Doyle's voice was in my head: don't perform, let it speak. So I let Linda talk. I let her build the whole story brick by brick, right up to the top where she stood proud. Ruiz listened and wrote, and her face gave away nothing. Then she turned to me and asked me to walk her through my side. I didn't tell Ruiz a story, I handed her one she could read herself. The family care plan first, Dana's approved name, signed and dated, Linda's name on no line anywhere. The new parent support enrollment with Callaway's scheduled visit right there on the calendar. The same-day pediatric clearance showing a healthy baby. Dana's photo with its timestamp. My drill orders proving exactly where I'd been and that I had no legal means to leave. I didn't leave him with no one, I said, as level as I could make it. I left him with a plan. She threw the plan in the trash. Ruiz read. She is not a woman who skims. She compared the family care plan to what Linda had just described, and I watched the temperature in the room change without anyone touching the thermostat. Linda's smile started slipping at the corners. Brenda went quiet. Dana spoke when asked, plain and steady. She'd been dismissed from the home over her objection. She'd tried to reach me and couldn't. The last thing she saw was Linda dragging the crib toward the door. Ruiz wrote it all down. Then she lifted her eyes from the binder and looked not at me but at Linda. "Mrs. Thorne," she said, in that careful, neutral voice that's somehow scarier than shouting, "you dismissed the approved caregiver and turned away the home visit nurse. Is that correct?" The silence in my living room had a texture to it. Linda opened her